They said she wouldn't last the winter, a widow with 2 starving children, surviving on scraps the town tossed away. But what no one expected was the cowboy who stepped out of the shadows, a man with a past tied to her husband's death. With 6 words, he changed everything. Get your things. You're coming home. Today I'll tell you a story where shame, betrayal, and redemption collide on the Texas frontier. Stay with me, and if you crave more hidden tales of the Wild West, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the rooftops of Calico Ridge, smearing the western sky with streaks of fire. Heat still clung to the air, thick and unrelenting, curling up from the dust-packed road like smoke from a dying campfire. The wind, sharp and dry, whipped through the alleyway and battered wooden shingles. It rattled loose signs and carried whispers, the kind that never stayed buried long in a place like this. Behind Tobias Clay's saloon, where the shadows crept long and the smell of spilled whiskey and old meat lingered, Delilah Price knelt beside a broken barrel. Her hair was pulled tight under a faded scarf, her dress patched so many times it had become a tapestry of survival. Her hands were steady, though her eyes flicked nervously at the back door of the saloon. Greta, her 6-year-old daughter, crouched behind a pile of crates, her knees scraped and dirty, but her eyes sharp as flint. Jonah 4 sat beside her, wide-eyed and pale. Greta reached into a dented tin pail left beside the saloon's trash heap. She pulled out a half-eaten apple, its flesh brown, but still firm in parts. She handed it to her brother with the care of someone passing along a relic. Jonah took a bite and immediately winced. He'd bitten into something hard. When he pulled the apple away, a rusted nail jutted from its core. Delilah snatched it from him, her voice trembling. "Honey, spit it out. Spit it." He did, coughing, scared. Delilah crushed the apple in her fist, the nail slicing her palm as she did. She didn't flinch. She was too used to bleeding quietly. Then came the voice. "Well, well. Look what the wind dragged in again." Tobias Clay stood at the edge of the saloon's back door, his arms crossed, a coil of leather in one hand. He wore the grin of a man who enjoyed being cruel more than being right. His voice echoed off the empty walls. "You think I don't see you, Miss Price?" he called, stepping down onto the dirt. "You think just 'cause it's the back alley, you're invisible." Delilah stood slowly, shielding her children behind her. "We're not stealing," she said, her voice even. "Just looking for what's left. Leftovers belong to dogs." Tobias sneered. "Or maybe that's fitting. Your kind belongs on your belly, same as your husband when they hanged him." Greta gasped. Jonah whimpered and clung to Delilah's skirt. Tobias cracked the leather strap once against his boot. "Go on. Get gone before I decide to let this fly." Delilah stiffened. Her pride screamed at her not to flinch, but her feet began to move, slow, hesitant. And then a shadow fell over Tobias's shoulder. "Don't." The voice was low, rough, like gravel, yet steady as a church bell. Tobias froze. He turned slowly. Cassidy Morgan stood at the edge of the alley, Boots' dusty hat pulled low. His coat flapped in the wind like a flag of defiance. His eyes, a washed-out green, locked onto Tobias with the weight of judgment long delayed. Tobias's grin faded. "Morgan, thought you'd gone to pasture." Cassidy stepped forward. His hand rested near his hip, not quite at his gun, but close enough that Tobias's fingers twitched. "Back off," Cassidy said. "Ain't your business what she eats. It is when she picks through my trash." Cassidy's eyes narrowed. "Then maybe you ought to throw out better food." Tobias blustered, but took a step back. "Fine. Take your charity case. But don't say I didn't warn you when folks start talking. Woman like her, trouble sticks." Cassidy didn't blink. "Get gone." Tobias turned with a scowl, disappearing back through the saloon door, muttering curses. Silence fell in the alley. Delilah didn't look at Cassidy at first. She crouched beside Jonah, brushing dirt from his cheek. Greta stared openly at the cowboy, awe mixed with suspicion. Cassidy cleared his throat. "You all right?" Delilah nodded once. "We're fine." "No, you're not," he replied, calm but certain. "Ain't been for a while." She looked up then. Their eyes met. Years passed in a glance, years since Emery Price, her husband, was tried and hanged. Years since Cassidy had spoken more than 10 words in town. The ghost of those days still clung to both of them. He looked down at the children, then back at her. "Get your things," he said. Delilah blinked. "What, you heard me?" Her jaw tightened. "I don't need your pity." "It ain't pity." "Then what is it?" Cassidy looked past her to the alley, the filth, the broken food, the cracked earth. Then back to her, to the cut on her hand, the fire in her eyes. "It's right," he said, "that's all." She stood up straight, chin raised. "I don't have things to get." Cassidy turned, jerking his head toward the main road. "Then come with me now." She hesitated. Greta touched her sleeve. "Mama, can we?" Jonah looked up, eyes wide and wet. He whispered, "Please." Delilah closed her eyes, fighting the weight of her pride. It wrapped around her like chains. But there was something else. Cassidy wasn't offering charity. He wasn't looking at her with shame or sorrow. Just steadiness. Just a man who had decided. And maybe for the first time in too long, she didn't have to decide everything alone. She nodded. "Just once." Cassidy tipped his hat, then led the way. They stepped out into the fading light together, a woman, 2 children, and a man who'd once walked beside the gallows. The wind followed, whispering through the dust. Behind them, Calico Ridge watched from behind curtains and windows, the town already buzzing with what it thought it knew. But none of that mattered, because this time Delilah was walking forward. And not alone. Cassidy's cabin sat 2 miles west of Calico Ridge, tucked between 2 bluffs and shaded by a pair of dying cottonwoods. It wasn't large, 1 room, a lean-to kitchen, and a covered porch with an old rocking chair that creaked even when the wind wasn't blowing. But it was clean. The air smelled of dried sage and ironwood smoke. It was the first time in weeks Delilah and her children had stepped into a place that didn't stink of mold or fear. Cassidy opened the door and stepped aside, letting them pass. Greta entered first, eyes wide, taking in the wood stove, the shelves lined with mason jars, and a quilt folded at the foot of the bed. Jonah clung to Delilah's skirt until he saw a small wooden horse on the table. He shuffled toward it, unsure, then smiled as he picked it up. Delilah hovered at the threshold, uncertain. Cassidy didn't urge her. He just walked to the hearth and stirred the pot of beans warming over low coals. "There's food if they were hungry," he said, not looking at her. "They always are," she replied softly, stepping inside. The children sat cross-legged near the fire, hands clasped in silent gratitude as they devoured bowls of beans. Delilah stayed standing, her arms crossed back close to the door. Cassidy handed her a bowl. "You need it more than they do." She took it, hesitated, then sat in a chair near the corner where her back could rest against the wall. She ate in silence, each bite a surrender. That night, Cassidy rolled out a second mattress by the fire. He didn't ask where she wanted to sleep. Greta crawled in beside Jonah and was asleep in minutes. Delilah remained seated, hands folded in her lap. Cassidy watched her from his cot, his hat over his eyes, pretending to sleep. But he saw how she stared at the rafters, jaw clenched, body rigid. She didn't trust the quiet. Not yet. The next morning, Cassidy left early to tend the cattle and mend fence. Delilah stirred the coals, warmed the leftovers, and helped the children wash in a basin. She found soap and thread in a drawer and mended Jonah's torn sleeve. Greta brushed her own hair with an old comb she'd found tucked under a shelf. By noon, the children were playing near the porch, chasing lizards and drawing shapes in the dirt. Delilah stood in the doorway, arms crossed again, this time against the sunlight, not suspicion. Inside the cabin was too quiet. The salines gnawed at her, pressing in. Her eyes landed on the corner of the room, where an old violin sat on a shelf. Dust coated its strings. Beneath it, a folded piece of sheet music with faded ink, the Widow's Waltz. Her breath caught. She hadn't seen that name in years. Flashback, the town hall draped in candlelight. Emery in a gray vest, clumsy but charming, spinning her in slow circles as the notes of the waltz floated from the fiddler's stage. She'd laughed, truly laughed, the kind that comes before you know how things can break. His voice had echoed in her ear, no matter where we end up, we'll always have this song. Back in the cabin, Delilah turned away from the violin, like it had burned her. Cassidy returned with a limp, a splinter in his hand and dust in his beard. He nodded to her, set his tools down, and washed up at the basin. She offered him a clean towel without speaking. He took it. At dinner, the children chattered about lizards and dust devils. Cassidy listened. Delilah watched. After they'd eaten, Cassidy leaned against the porch post looking at the stars. Delilah stood nearby, arms folded, the evening wind tugging at her skirt. "You don't talk much," she said. "Neither do you." She glanced at him. "Because every word feels like I'm giving something away." He nodded. "Maybe that's why I quit speaking so much." There was a long pause. She broke it. "Why'd you bring us here?" He didn't look at her. "Figured someone ought to." She bristled. "You don't owe me anything." "I know. But they'll talk." "They already do." Another silence, heavier this time. Cassidy stepped back inside. Delilah remained on the porch, staring out at the dark. The next day, Delilah walked into town alone. She needed supplies: thread, salt, maybe a bit of sugar if she could afford it. The children stayed behind with Cassidy, who taught Jonah how to hold a hammer and let Greta feed the chickens. Calico Ridge was quieter than usual, but eyes still followed her. Whispers flitted like flies. Mrs. Cartwright spotted her near the dry goods store. The older woman's face wrinkled into a sneer. "So you're back. Thought you'd run off with the wind." Delilah didn't answer. Cartwright crossed her arms. "You think just because you found yourself a cowboy with a roof that makes you decent again?" Delilah's fists clenched. "I never stopped being decent. Town doesn't see it that way. Town never saw me at all." She left Cartwright behind, head high, throat tight. Pastor Tillman found her near the church steps. He wore his black coat, Bible tucked under one arm. His eyes, usually warm, were shadowed. "Delilah," he said, gentle but wary, "I've been praying for you." "Then pray harder." He hesitated. "You know people are talking. I've heard worse." Tillman looked pained. "Cassidy, he's not." She turned to him sharply. "He's not Emery, if that's what you're trying to say. I'm saying he's a man with a history. He rides alone for a reason. And I sleep sitting up for a reason, Pastor." That silenced him. She stepped past him, chin held high, her steps ringing hard on the wooden planks. Back at the cabin, night fell quietly. Delilah sat near the fire, watching her children sleep. Cassidy sat across the room, mending a strap. Neither spoke. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't cruel, just heavy. A house without music, and too many ghosts between the walls. It was a quiet morning when Greta found the photograph. She had been searching for a thread spool to fix a loose button on Jonah's shirt. Cassidy had shown her the drawer with supplies once, before saying she could look whenever she needed. But this time, beneath a tangle of twine and old nails, her fingers brushed something: smooth paper, aged and curling at the corners. She pulled it out. A sepia photograph. 3 men stood shoulder to shoulder, dusty hats in hand, eyes squinting at the sun. One was unmistakably Cassidy younger, with less wear in his face but the same hard eyes. The second man Greta's heart lurched was Emery Price, her father. Taller, leaner, with a crooked smile, and a charm even the faded photo couldn't dim. The third man wore a marshal's badge. Greta stared at it, breath shallow. She walked outside, photo clutched in her hand. Delilah was hanging laundry in the breeze. "Ma," Greta said, holding the picture out. Delilah turned, saw the photo, and froze. The wind tugged at the wet sheets. She took it slowly, eyes scanning the image. "Where did you get this?" "Cassidy's drawer," Greta said softly. Delilah looked again. Emery, Cassidy, and the marshal. Her hands trembled. That evening, when the children were asleep and the light dimmed to amber, Delilah stood in the doorway of the cabin. Cassidy was mending a fence post, the last rays of sun brushing his shoulders. "Where was this taken?" she asked, holding up the photo. Cassidy didn't flinch. He set his tools down and wiped his hands on a cloth. "Santa Fe," he said. "6 years back. You knew Emery." He nodded. "We rode together. Before everything changed." She stepped closer. "And the marshal?" Cassidy exhaled slowly. "Federal man. Came looking for a killer. Said Emery fit the description. Had witnesses?" Delilah's voice was cold. "And you turned him in?" Cassidy met her gaze. "I did." Violence had stretched between them. "I watched them hang him, Cassidy." Her voice cracked. "I buried him with my own hands. And all this time you never told me." "I didn't think you'd want to hear it. I didn't want to hear it from the streets, from the gossips. But I sure as hell needed to hear it from you." Cassidy's face was stone. "He killed a deputy, Delilah. Unarmed. Shot him in the back. That's what the marshal said. That's what the evidence said." Delilah took a step back, fury rising. "You think I didn't know what kind of man Emery was? You think I needed you to decide justice for me? He was dangerous. He was mine." Her voice echoed off the hills. The silence that followed was colder than the wind. Inside, Greta sat wide-eyed under the blanket. She had heard every word. That night, Delilah packed a bundle of her things. She moved like someone half awake, robotic lips pressed in a firm line. She stepped into the cabin one last time, looked at her children sleeping peacefully, then turned to Cassidy, who stood by the door. "I'm going," she said. He didn't stop her. His shoulders sagged, but he nodded once. Delilah paused, voice trembling. "I can't stay under the roof of the man who ended my husband's life." "I didn't hang him," Cassidy said quietly. "But I didn't stop it either." She left before he could say more. The door swung shut behind her. Outside, the moon was high, and her footsteps crunched in the frostbitten dirt. Her figure grew smaller in the dark. Inside, Cassidy sat by the cold fire, eyes fixed on the door. A single tear ran down his cheek. Greta woke just before dawn. Jonah still slept, arms flung wide. She crept from the blankets, heart pounding. Mama had gone. She'd heard the fight, heard the name killer, heard the word hang. And though she didn't understand it all, she understood enough. They weren't wanted. Not even here. Not even by Cassidy. She tiptoed to the drawer and took the photograph, folded it, slipped it into her pocket. Then she walked outside barefoot. The wind bit at her, but she didn't stop. She moved past the chicken coop, past the split fence, toward the hills. Toward the place Mama once said they found Emery's hat after he died. Maybe if she could find it again, she'd find him. Maybe if she could prove he wasn't bad, Mama would come back. Maybe if she was brave enough, she could fix what grown-ups always broke. She didn't look back. And the sky began to bleed with morning. The sun had barely cleared the ridgeline when Delilah returned. Dust clung to the hem of her dress, and the sorrow from last night still lingered heavy in her chest. She hadn't slept. Her feet had wandered through the darkness, past the empty barns and abandoned crossroads of her past. But no path gave her answers. No silence brought peace. So she turned back. The cabin looked the same, still weather-worn, humble. Smoke rose faintly from the chimney, and a rooster crowed in the distance. Delilah stepped through the door, expecting to find her children still curled up under quilts. But Jonah was alone. He sat on the edge of the mattress, bare feet dangling, hugging the wooden horse Greta had held the night before. Her heart jolted. "Where's your sister?" Jonah didn't look up. "She said she was going to find Papa." Delilah's breath caught. "What?" "She left before the sun came," he murmured. "Said maybe she'd find him where you buried his hat." Panic flared in her throat like fire. She ran outside, 3 eyes sweeping the fields, calling Greta's name. No answer, just wind. The hills beyond the cabin loomed wide and unclimbed. She turned back, sprinted down the trail toward the pasture where Cassidy worked. Her voice broke through the stillness. "Cassidy." He looked up from repairing a gate, surprise flashing across his face. "She's gone," Delilah gasped. "Greta." She went looking for Emery. His tools dropped instantly. "Which way?" "She thinks he's in the canyon, where we found his hat." Cassidy's jaw clenched. "That's 3 miles through snakebrush and dry creeks." "I know." He ran to the stable. Within minutes, 2 horses were saddled. Delilah climbed on without hesitation. Their eyes met, not as enemies or strangers, but as 2 people bound by a child. They rode hard. The prairie opened before them, like a wound. Thorny mesquite tore at their sleeves as they galloped through arroyos and shallow gulches. Birds scattered. Dust rose behind them like a storm. Delilah's mind raced faster than the horse. Images of Greta alone scared hurt. They carved terror into her chest. "She's just a little girl," Delilah said breathlessly. "Why didn't I see it?" "Because you're drowning," Cassidy said. "And she's trying to swim for both of you." Delilah's eyes watered. "Not from the wind." "I shouldn't have left," she muttered. "You were hurt." She turned toward him as they slowed to cross a narrow wash. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Cassidy exhaled. "Because I was a coward." Delilah stared. "I didn't hate Emery," he continued. "I was angry. He changed. Started running with men I didn't trust. Then that marshal came. I thought, maybe if I turned him in, it'd stop him before something worse happened." "Something worse than death?" Cassidy's voice cracked. "I didn't know they'd hang him. I thought he'd be tried. Maybe locked up. I never thought you'd be the one left holding the pieces." Delilah looked away, tears blurring her vision. "I loved him, Cassidy. Even with all his faults. I know. He wasn't a good man. But he was mine." Cassidy nodded. "And I took him from you." Their horses climbed the slope toward the canyon. The land grew steeper, rockier. The sun blazed overhead. Delilah wiped her face. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I'm not asking you to." She looked at him again, this time without fury. Just raw honesty. "Then why are you helping me now?" Cassidy pulled up the reins at the crest of a hill. Below the canyon yawned wide, jagged cliffs, shadows and the whisper of wind through scrub. "Because," he said, "when you lose something, you can't replace. The only thing left is to keep someone else from losing the same." Delilah followed his gaze. Down in the basin, a flicker of movement. There, she whispered. A small figure dwarfed by stone and sky moved slowly along the canyon edge. "Greta." Delilah's breath hitched. Cassidy was already riding down the slope. They reached the canyon floor and dismounted. The horses could go no further. Delilah ran, heart-pounding, feet skidding on gravel. Greta stood near a ledge holding something small and round. Mama. Greta turned, eyes wide. Delilah caught her in a tight embrace. "Don't you ever do that again," she sobbed. "I was trying to find him," Greta whispered. "So you'd come back." Delilah pulled back, cupping her daughter's face. You are never the reason I leave. You and Jonah. You're the reason I stay. Cassidy stepped forward. What are you holding? Greta opened her hand. The old tin badge Emery once wore, dulled by time. I found it under a rock, where you said his hat was. Cassidy took it gently, staring at the dented metal. Then he looked at Delilah. Even after all this, he said he left a part of himself behind. Delilah nodded. We all do. The wind stirred the canyon. For the first time, it didn't sound like ghosts. It sounded like a song without words. They stood there, three figures framed by stone and sky, the past between them, heavy, but not unmovable. And somewhere in that silence, something inside Delilah shifted. Forgiveness didn't bloom, but the soil cracked. And that was a start. Greta stood near the canyon's edge, the morning light casting a golden rim around her small frame. The wind tugged gently at her hair, and in her hands she held a weather-worn hat, wide-brimmed, dusty and frayed at the edges. It was unmistakably Emery's. Delilah slowed her steps as she approached, her boots crunching softly on gravel. Cassidy followed, a quiet presence behind her. Greta didn't turn around. She held the hat to her chest like it was something holy. I found it, she said softly. Just like you said, buried under the rocks. Delilah knelt beside her, heart full and fragile. I see that, baby. Greta looked up. Her eyes were too wise for a child. Mama, was Papa all bad? The question hung in the air like a bell still ringing. Cassidy stepped forward and slowly dropped to one knee. The wind caught the edge of his coat, lifting it like a banner. No one is just one thing, he said. Not your Papa. Not me, not anyone. Greta looked at him. But you let them hang him. Cassidy swallowed. I thought I was doing the right thing. But I've been wrong before. Delilah placed a hand on Greta's back. Your father made mistakes. Big ones. But he loved you. That part was always real. The little girl nodded slowly, clutching the hat tighter. Her tears came silent, soft. Cassidy turned away, giving them space. He looked out over the canyon, the horizon painted with gold and crimson. Delilah stood and walked to him. I don't hate you, she said. Cassidy didn't answer. I hate the hole he left behind. The silence, the not knowing, the ache of not being enough for my children. He turned, eyes shadowed. You've always been enough, Delilah. You've carried more than most men ever could. For a long time they said nothing more. Then Cassidy reached out slowly, not touching her, but letting his hand hover between them. She looked at it, didn't take it. But she didn't pull away either. The journey back to Calico Ridge was quiet. Greta rode in front of Cassidy, clutching the hat. Jonah clung to Delilah like he was afraid she'd vanish again. They passed dry creeks and rusted fences, scattered bones of long-dead cattle bleaching in the sun. When they reached the town limits, whispers already stirred. People peeked from behind curtains. Murmurs rode the breeze. Cassidy didn't flinch. Tobias Clay stood on the saloon steps, arms crossed, chewing a toothpick. When he saw Greta holding Emery's hat, he sneered. Well, ain't that poetic, he said. The murderer's brat playing dress-up. Cassidy slid off his horse in one fluid motion. He walked straight to Tobias. The punch landed hard, not sloppy, not angry, just funnel. Tobias hit the ground with a grunt. Cassidy stood over him. You don't talk about her like that. Sheriff Webb stepped forward, hand on his belt, but didn't interfere. His eyes met Cassidy's. He gave a small nod, then turned away. Delilah, watching from horseback, felt something shift in the air. The town that had turned its back on her, it didn't cheer, but it didn't spit either. That was something. Later that day, Delilah stood on the porch of the cabin, watching the sun begin its descent. Cassidy was in the corral with Jonah, showing him how to cinch a saddle. Not too tight, Cassidy said. Horse needs to breathe, same as you. Jonah nodded solemnly, small fingers working the straps. In the yard, Greta danced barefoot in the dirt, twirling with arms outstretched. Delilah stepped down and joined her, the hem of her skirt brushing the earth. Cassidy leaned on the fence watching. Delilah whistled a tune, soft, slow, haunting. Greta giggled. "What song is that?" Delilah smiled, eyes damp. "It's called The Widow's Waltz." Cassidy closed his eyes. The melody was like breath, fragile but alive. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Pastor Tillman came by the next morning. He stood by the gate, hat in hand. Cassidy stepped out first. "I came to say goodbye," the pastor said. "Some prayers are best said elsewhere." Delilah joined them. "You're leaving," Tillman nodded. "Not because of you. But maybe I held on too long to a version of faith that didn't make room for the broken." He turned to Cassidy. "Sometimes God sends the wrong man to do the right thing." Cassidy offered a nod of respect. No handshake, just understanding. The pastor left without another word. That night, they lit a fire behind the cabin. The children roasted potatoes on sticks. Delilah brought out an old tin cup and passed it around. They didn't drink to forget. They drank to remember not just the pain, but the survival. Cassidy sat close but not touching. Delilah leaned back, watching the stars. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. "Every day. And yet you're still here." He looked at her. "You are too." They smiled. A slow, cautious smile. But it stayed. Weeks passed. Greta planted flowers beneath the kitchen window. Jonah learned to whistle. Delilah cleaned out the old corner shelf and placed a framed photo there, Emery Cassidy and the marshal. She didn't hide it, didn't glorify it, just placed it. Cassidy built a swing from a rope and plank, hung it from the cottonwood. The kids took turns, laughter ringing across the land. And on Sundays, they didn't go to church. They stayed home. They cooked together. They rested. They lived. One afternoon, Cassidy came in with dust on his boots and a question in his eyes. He didn't kneel, didn't pull out a ring, just took Delilah's hand. "Will you stay?" She looked at him, at the home they had built from ruins. "I already am." Sometimes home isn't a place you find. It's the person who won't let you walk alone. Some Western tales don't begin with a gunfire or the thunder of hooves, but with the weary footsteps of a woman, clutching her children, searching for scraps to eat. I used to think the West was only made of heroes and outlaws, but it wasn't. It was also filled with people caught between pride and hunger, between a love already buried and a hope barely alive. Today I want to tell you one of those stories about Delilah, a young widow, her 2 children, and Cassidy, a cowboy carrying a guilt too heavy to shake. This story perhaps will make you see the West through different eyes.